What's up, Nutrition Heroes? This is Dr. Brad Watts, and I'm glad to be back behind the microphone here again for yet another episode of the Nutrition Hero podcast. Welcome. Today, you are going to be listening to an interview that I did with Dr. Chris Shade. Dr. Shade is one of my favorite people in the functional medicine space right now. He's an interesting character, but even more so, he has a heart for helping people sort through chronic disease. And today, while our conversation spans a few different topics, the one that I am excited for you to hear about is mercury testing. And Dr. Shade's company, Quicksilver Scientific, has put together some unparalleled access, I believe, in the functional medicine space for explaining mercury detoxification to your patients and blood metals. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you to Dr. Shade and make sure that you grab a pen and take some notes. And his website will be in the podcast notes below here. And so you can go and check him out on YouTube as well. Tons of educational videos. This gentleman is an animal in the educational space. So, all right. Enjoy Dr. Chris Shade. All right, Dr. Shade, welcome to the Nutrition Hero podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here. I always like to talk to you, Brad.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. So I'm excited to introduce you to our audience today for a couple of reasons. One, I've gotten to hear you speak a handful of times, and it's always a little different every time, right?
Yeah.
But it's awesome. I appreciate your passion for what you do, first and foremost.
Yeah, you're trying to describe a set of things as you see them. And there's always a dynamic between the speaker and the audience. And so you're always describing them a little bit differently. Yeah. You're thinking about them differently that week. So you focus on this 1 week, that 1 week, that 1 week. But it's always the same story. And it's actually better to see it multiple times and hear it said multiple times because it really sinks in. You know, I'll always remember Dietrich Klinghardt. Hal Huggins did this too. It was about the fourth or fifth time they saw me. They go, "Oh, I think I know what you're talking about now."
I think that's the sign of a good speaker, though.
I'm hoping. It's either a horrible speaker or you're really talking big concept.
Yeah. One of the things I want to ask you about today is your Mercury Tri-Test. It's a test that I have found quite a bit of use for in the functional medicine world. And whether it be like problem cases or whether it be people that come search me out because they know I use the Dr. Shade technology, I got to say, it's pretty cool. How did that even come into fruition? Where did it start?
Yeah, it's an awesome story. One, to understand the test, why you don't need the challenge test, and where it all came from. And it came from environmental mercury testing. My PhD was in environmental metals. It's called biogeochemistry. How do metals cycle through, into the rain, down into the water, through the biosphere, the geosphere, and so it's biogeochemistry. And in that study, you have a lot of inorganic mercury, and it's building up into methyl mercury, and it's going up through the food chain, so much so that the fish swimming in a lake will have 1, even 10 million times more mercury than the mercury in the water. And so this bioaccumulation is a big deal. And so they're always trying to, and that's the methyl mercury form that bioaccumulates, and they're always trying to measure little bits of methyl mercury forming at the base of the food chain. And so they need this mercury speciation where you separate the inorganic mercury, the sort of raw salt form, from the organomercurial methyl mercury. And it's almost the opposite in the body, where you want to separate the inorganic. So in the environment, you got a small amount of methyl mercury, a large amount of inorganic mercury. It's flipped around in the body. You know, when people who are omnivores and they eat fish, they got a large amount of methyl mercury, smaller amount of inorganic mercury. But they're really important to see the difference because they move through the body differently, just like they move through the environment differently. They're excreted differently. And so I had done a master's in environmental science around agriculture, and then I went to University of Illinois to do more of that, and I found it really boring, and met this guy who was real brilliant guy who does these global cycling models of mercury. And he said, "Hey, are you good in a lab?" I'm like, "I'm definitely good in a lab, because can you build me a new system for mercury speciation? Because the ones we have now suck." And I'm like, "Sure, what's that?" And he didn't even have a lab. I was like, beg, borrow, steal equipment from everybody, and we suddenly figured out how to do this in one analysis, because it's usually done in two separate analyses. They do total mercury, and then there's this distillation and GC for methyl mercury. And so we figured out how to do it all in one. And then when I started the company, it was we got a patent on it, and then we started the company exploiting that for environmental work here in Boulder, and with an eye to moving into clinical work. And then in 2008, everything crashed, and some people said to me, the only thing that the only thing that made it well through the Great Depression was healthcare. So I jumped over into integrative and functional medicine, and that's how we got here.
All right. So it's been relatively brief, but the cool part is the applications that you are making available with this test, I think, are really sweet. So, for instance, patients that nobody else can solve, cases nobody can solve. The neurologic ones are the ones that get me the most. The ones that patients have fatigue and then neuro symptoms. Yeah. You run them through a Mercury Tri-Test, and you're like, "What in the world? How did nobody be able? How can we not see this anywhere else?"
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And some of the most notable cases, like Dale Bredesen, the functional neurologist guy, he goes around and he talks about this one specific case who was a 56-year-old with early onset dementia, and Dale put him through his whole program and just didn't do anything. And I don't know who gave him the idea to test mercury, but they sent a test into me, and super high levels. And a lot of these guys, especially these sort of West Coast CEOs, and sometimes they're in New York, they're like, meat bad, fish good.
Right.
And, they're kind of status driven, and they got a lot of money. And so they're always eating tuna steak and swordfish. And that was what happened.
Just flown in today, right?
Yeah. Well, that was what happened with Tony Robbins, too. He was flying it in from Hawaii thinking that he's getting, nothing from the bottom of the food chain, top of the food chain. Don't want these bottom feeders. And they have the most mercury. And so the CEO guy, it was all mercury. And so he just had me design the program for him, and he followed that and reversed all the cognitive problems.
That's phenomenal. And so let's talk about some of the places you bring in food here. I'm sure we'll talk about teeth in a minute, but when you talk about some of the sources of mercury in the human body right now, what are the main ones?
Yeah, so the two main ones, far and above anything else, are fish and dental amalgam. And they bring in totally different forms of mercury. And this was, in fact, I still call half of my talks looking inside the black box, because when I came from this really sophisticated environmental mercury paradigm where we're measuring all these different forms everywhere, we have transformation constants, we know what they stick to there, and then I come over to integrative functional medicine, and they're like, mercury bad, chelator good, and no mercury in anything unless you take the chelator, and then it shows the mercury. And it was like, yes, thog, chelator. It's like cavemen talking about this, but they got a drug. And I'm like, wait a second, and it's like all mercury was the same. And I'm like, well, they're very different. And so you get methyl mercury from fish, and you build up high blood levels from that. And it's very mobile, goes across the blood-brain barrier, goes in and out of cells. But it's not as toxic as the salt form inorganic mercury that you get from dental amalgam. So dental amalgam, you're inhaling a vapor that's oxidizing to a salt in your body, whereas the methyl mercury, you get it through the GI tract. And the inorganic mercury from the amalgam doesn't build up such a big blood level. And so if you're just looking at total mercury in blood, somebody who eats a lot of fish has a lot, and somebody who only has amalgams has only a little bit. And so what we had to do is go and separate the two different forms in blood and put them on their own reference ranges, almost like they're two different metals. And so you get your, 5th to 95th percentile of inorganic mercury, and even at the 95th percentile, you're below for inorganic mercury, you're below the detection limit for most blood mercury tests.
Mm.
And so those were always missed before. Whereas in blood, people would see the methylmercury. But methylmercury doesn't go through the urine, only inorganic mercury does. So if you had amalgam, you'd have more mercury in your urine, but not much in your blood. If you ate fish, you had a lot in the blood, but not a lot in the urine. And then they make up all these stories to accommodate that. But it's really just, you don't know anything about mercury is the problem.
Right.
And so I'd show up and I'd give these lectures, and these people would be like, wow. And they, wow. And then I go away, and then they just go right back to what they did before. So it took a little while. But the beauty in the Mercury Tri-Test is we can see the different forms. We can see their interconversion because they'll switch too. Mostly it's methylmercury from fish breaking down into inorganic mercury. Okay. And then we look at hair and urine as the excretion indices. And the most relevant functional measurement in the Mercury Tri-Test is blood inorganic mercury versus urinary inorganic mercury. And when the kidneys are working right, there's a fixed ratio between the two. It's about 7-1. And that means it's going in and it's coming out. And that's a good situation because if you take away the source, you'll get rid of it.
Right.
But then the problems are when the blood's elevating and the urine's low because you're not able to get it out through the kidney. And the coolest part about that is it has nothing to do with glomerular filtration. So your GFR can be just fine. Your creatinine clearance could be just fine, but you're not getting rid of mercury from the blood.
So what's the clip?
It's active transporters in the proximal tubules.
Interesting.
So how does the nephron work? You have filtration, and then you go through the tubules, and there's the winnowing. You're pulling back water, you're pulling back electrolytes, you're pulling back peptides and amino acids. And at the same time, there's active transporters dumping into the blood. And it's the same transport system that's in the liver, pulling from the blood and dumping into the bile. But the proximal tubules are really delicate structures, and they can get very easily damaged. And in some of the literature where they were kind of creating that damage, it was a combination of mercury and endotoxin together. So you have mercury sources, and you have leaky gut, or you have chronic nasal infections or UTIs. You're going to hit with both at the same time, and they're synergistically toxic when they're together. And so that transport, that's not just mercury. That's a lot of other metals. It's a lot of other, mold toxins, pesticides, herbicides, endotoxin itself. They're all going out through that transport system. And so it's showing you that your kidney detoxification is fundamentally damaged.
Which is crazy if you think about it, that it goes underneath the radar for such a long period of time for most people, at least that I've seen. So I heard you talk about. And the question is,
then does GFR fail later?
Right. That's what I was going to say. I heard you talk about that a year ago, and I was like, well, their GFR is awesome. And the next thing you said was, doesn't matter what their GFR is. And I was like, all right. So in addition to the Mercury Tri-Test, you have a blood metals test. Yeah. And the blood metals test pairs together things that are working synergistically, to use your word, with mercury. Can we kind of talk about that, whether it be lead or whatever? Yeah.
So, like, for instance, let me just hide the name of my friend there. In the top, you've got nutrition metals, and then you got toxic metals. And so for the nutritional metals, you're looking for sufficiency and balance. So you have calcium, magnesium. Do you have enough, and do you have balance? You know, when you have super high calcium, super low magnesium, that's a very inflammatory activity. And then you have copper and zinc, and that's probably the most determinant for how bad the other metals are going to be in you. When copper is in excess over zinc, it starts to be a toxic metal, and it's synergistically toxic with all the toxics. And that'll include arsenic, cadmium. What do we have on there? We got arsenic, cadmium, cobalt. I should probably take it off there because anybody who does B12 injections starts having high cobalt. And we had it on there originally because people with cobalt chromium implants start getting cobalt toxic. But arsenic, cadmium, lead, and then there's mercury on there as well. But This is just total mercury. You're not separating different forms. You're not looking at excretion. So it's really just for seeing how high is somebody's fish mercury burden.
Right.
And then there's silver and strontium. Strontium and silver, some people, strontium was in the bone supplements because it makes a more dense bone structure,
Mm-hmm.
because it's heavier than calcium. Now, lead does that too. It makes a more dense bone structure until it kills the osteoblasts, and
Right.
then you lose your bone. So it doesn't mean that it's a good thing. And they followed some cohorts of women taking strontium supplements for bones, and they had neurological problems from it. So we have, unintended consequence. And silver, I like to track silver for people who take a lot of colloidal silver. There's a point at which it becomes too much, and it's not that you turn blue. Like for me, I was doing a lot of silver IVs for a systemic fungal infection. And eventually it kind of turned out a little bit like mercury toxicity. I got hot liver, I got a cold sore, it was kind of blotchy and irritable, and so detox that. So that's why all those are there. That's sort of your map of your total metal profile. And then there's a couple of other detox cofactors like selenium. Lithium's a big one these days because lithium's a cofactor for B vitamin transport, and it helps your parasympathetic sympathetic balance. Then manganese, which is an essential until it's a toxic. And I see I get a lot of Japanese with really high manganese, and I don't know where that is, but they generally have neurological issues. You see, manganese is the one that's associated most with is it Parkinson's or MS? Parkinson's, I think.
Wow. So when you're looking at all of these things, I'm going to go back to the proximal tubules before we dig into some more of the blood metals here. What are some of the measures that doctors can look for as far as helping those heal? Or do they just stay wrecked?
No, we get them better.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's got to be some resolution, otherwise you don't want to talk about it.
Exactly. So, in the you'll have like the urine to blood ratios, and so this is urine versus blood, and as levels go up, they should go up along that line. And what happens when it's bad, the point that represents the two goes down into the red, right? So you got high blood, low urine. Okay, so the way I usually read these, I start at the top. I look at methylmercury. In this measurement here, this is somebody who doesn't eat fish. If somebody eats a lot of fish, you'll see it's up there. And so you see, all right, how much mercury are they consuming? Then you go down to the inorganic mercury line, and these are all low, but say it was up in here. Then I want to say, is that a constant source or is that retention toxicity? That was what Huggins called it. He identified this, but he didn't have all the measurements. He just said, oh, some people have a lot of amalgams, but low urine, they tend to be sick. So that's retention toxicity. So I see inorganics high. I look at the urine to blood ratio. If the urine to blood ratio is bad, then I know it's building up in the blood because of retention. If it's good, then I know it's just constant source. So let's say it's bad. What are we going to do?
Right.
Now, we'll look over into the nutrients and toxics, make sure, is there anything we have to address in there? Maybe they need some zinc, maybe they need some selenium, some molybdenum, and we'll address that. We'll see, what else is high? Is lead high? Is arsenic high? Often when it's seafood-based, you'll see arsenic and mercury together. So, all right, so let's say there's arsenic and mercury's high, urine to blood ratio is bad. Okay, so we're going to amplify the glutathione system to get stuff out. That means we're going to bring in a liposomal glutathione. We're going to have some sort of NRF2 upregulator, like lipoic acid or polyphenols, to turn up the enzymes that work with glutathione. And we need some sort of binder in the GI tract to get things. We use IMD in our world. It's a metal binder. But how do we go for the kidney? So on a source basis,
this is the holy grail, by the way, for everybody listening, right? So go ahead.
This is it right here. So on a source basis, what's causing that? So we want to stop endotoxin from getting into the system. So look for leaky gut. If it's UTIs, well, we'll talk about how to deal with that in a second. Make sure there's not chronic sinus infections, jaw infections, GI infections. Then the supplements that I use for that, there's only a couple that work real well. Rentone from Ayush Herbs is the best one that I've found. I'm working on developing one now to be better than that. But Rentone from Ayesherbs, they're an Ayurveda company up in the Northwest. That one works real well. I used to use from Soluna Labs. They made really good. It was a European company that made really good spagyrics. They had one called Renalin. Unfortunately, they said too many things about medical claims, and they're not in this country anymore. The FDA excommunicated them. But herbs that work, solidago is helpful, cranberry is helpful, corn silk, uva ursi, those are all good. But again, the Rentone really is the one that really shifts it the most. But you also have to get glutathione in there and work on leaky gut. And then when that goes up, you'll see people with higher urine levels at the end of the detox than the beginning of the detox. That's when you're just killing it.
That's crazy. So in this type of a situation, how long do you wait? Like, are you priming the pump before you start detoxing with Rentone? Are you adding Rentone in at the same time? What does that look like?
I'm generally do it all at the same time because the Mercury detox is titrating up.
Okay, gotcha.
And I don't. If they're really sensitive, I'll titrate up the Rentone and I'll start that first. I might give them a small amount of glutathione. I might give them homeopathics or spagyrics. Those are for the really difficult cases. But, we've learned to use binders better and better. And, using charcoal, clay, chitosan. We have the Ultra binder that'll be in the Bio-G line soon. And that really allows you to work much faster because it's clearing up a lot of stuff in the GI tract. So barring the really sensitive cases, I'm gonna start everything at the same time. But I'm gonna start full doses of Rentone, like 3 caps a day. I might go up to 6 caps. If they're having UTIs, and that's part of it too, you can go up to 9 caps for up to 3-4 weeks. So I'll hit right on with the Rentone and titrate up all the glutathione-based detoxification.
Very cool. So how long before you have the shade version of Rentone out on the market?
Give me 2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months. All right. I can tolerate that. So, but I'll hold you to it.
Yeah, totally hold me to that.
Yeah, that's right. I won't be the only one. So when we look at the detoxification protocols that you go through, how did you develop the dosing strategies?
It was very empirical. You know that there's always going to be a titration. You get people in at one dose and you're moving them up and you get to the really high doses where you're really upregulating everything. And then you come down to a maintenance and you keep that going for a while. But what were those doses? Frankly, I started on myself. I had like 17 amalgams. I got them all out at once.
Gosh.
I got them all out in 3 hours, like in this speed drilling festival.
Right.
And then I launched right into the DMSA, 1,500 milligrams a day, and I'm measuring the urine. I didn't have any of these tools, and nothing's coming out in my urine. And of course, so a guy like me, you just put more in, take more and more DMSA. And because I didn't realize this about the kidneys, mine were fried, and I just took myself into a hole. I was just a disaster, and I got myself out, by developing IMD. This is how I figured out the nano cat's claw. Get yourself to the Epstein-Barr and cytomegalovirus, and then you're like, how do I save myself? And then it comes to you. In the dark night of the biochemical soul, it comes to you. And so, in the Hahnemann tradition, I made this stuff IMD. And I was making 400 milligram capsules, which would be 4 scoops, like the dose now is like 1 scoop. I was doing like 4 scoops and doing like 6 of those at a time. And I got myself better really quick. And so I applied that to other people and it was too much for them. And so we just really worked out, sort of where most people could start at and then titrate them up. And we started making those protocols in 2009, 2010. So we've had 8 years of harmonizing that stuff. So now when we start new protocols, I usually hit a little harder than most people do. Right. And so I do what I would do, and then I dial it back and write it down.
Right. Okay. I got you. So a couple of years ago, I was sitting in an IAOMT. You familiar with those guys?
Yeah.
I was sitting in a conference. Yeah. I was sitting in a conference. I don't know why a chiropractor is sitting in their conference, but anyway, I'm sitting in their conference, and I'm learning about mercury and detoxification, and they keep referencing this crazy guy from Colorado, and they talk about this work that Shade's doing and whatever. And then I was at a seminar a week later, and I met you, and I was like,
"You're the crazy guy from
Colorado.
Colorado."
What in the world? So anyway, you take a sign, right? So I'd start digging in on some of the work, and what's interesting is that when you start learning about mercury and you start learning as a functional medicine doctor about the detoxification protocols and the process and all the different organs that it takes, people start showing up. They start showing up, and it's weird. They come out of the woodwork.
Oh yeah, the patients show up.
Yeah, they're like, help me. And
that's it.
And so one of the things that I was thinking about as I was just getting into this world is what is going on in the dental world right now with mercury amalgams. Are they still a standard? Or are they something that they're moving away from because of the toxicity issue? What's going on there?
Well, it's really pretty fascinating. It was very sad for a long time. It was a standard. I mean, think like the tobacco industry. I mean, imagine these guys in the ADA suddenly say, wow, this is a really bad idea. What are they going to do? Just like cut and run and say, wow, that was a really bad idea? Oh, and you guys are liable for like $500 trillion worth of damages. It could get ugly. And so they had to slowly move away from it. And unfortunately, it's a sort of a socioeconomic thing. So amalgam is cheaper than composite. And so the reason people want the composite is not because it's not mercury, it's because it's white. And so people with more money get the composites, and insurance for like bare bones insurance covers amalgam. So amalgam is sort of, lower socioeconomic groups still get it, but they're moving away. And just a couple of months ago, this guy came to me and he wanted to bring all of our stuff to the ADA conference in Chicago, the American Dental Association. It was like, it seemed like the evil empire, 10 years ago. And it was like a war that was going on. And I'm like, no way, that's crazy. And this was just a couple of weeks ago. And, there was, there was people that were like, no way. But there was all this interest. And now they want to have me speak at the California Dental Association. So there's crazy stuff, And, like IAMT, they were very reactionary how they used to talk. And, it's going to give you this disease and that disease and kill you. And so that's why there was such a war. But when I go up and talk, I say, okay, so biochemically, enough mercury is going to inhibit these things. It's going to inhibit that. It's going to make this a little worse. And so it's this chronic story. It's not like, driving through your chest with a lightning bolt. It's just like it's weighing you down, and people can understand that. And then you say, well, how do you get rid of it? You say, well, you tack it onto glutathione, you move it through a bunch of transport proteins, and it comes out. So we're just going to support that, and they can handle that. And so I'm very interested to see where that's all going now.
That'll be really interesting, especially it's going to be like a collision of worlds. And the scary part is it's Dr. Shade putting the two worlds together. See how that goes for you. So anyway, how good of a politician are you? That's the question.
I can be either way. Sometimes, I really, I help, diffuse tensions, and other times I create.
There's no way. I'm just kidding. All right, next question, right? So when we look at what's coming down the road for not just mercury testing necessarily, but when we talk about like fish farming and all that kind of stuff, and we have people that are just like loading this stuff up, is there going to be anything that changes this? Or do they just have to be aware and take care of their family by running through the detox protocols?
Yeah, well, there's two things there. Awareness for sure. So through the food chain, if you go from a sardine to a swordfish, that's about 1,000-fold difference in mercury. That's a lot. You got a lot of running room to pick fish that's not super high in mercury. And so just if you're going to eat that stuff, just don't eat it very often. Don't make it the mainstay.
Gotcha.
You know, a couple of pieces of sushi. Salmon is a much safer scenario.
Hmm.
Lower levels in general. You get to king, then you got higher levels, but just don't eat it all the time. Fish farming. Farmed fish is much lower mercury, but then they got all these pesticides and herbicides because you got, you know, a million fish all living in a pool together, and
Right.
it's a little dirty, so they put a lot of other junk in them. And so it's really about making reasonable choices. But detoxification is something that everybody should do, and learning the fundamentals of detoxification. You know, keep liver open, keep kidney open, keep GI open, and that's you keep all those open, and then once in a while you stimulate the cells to all dump, and it's not that hard to sort of wrap your head around. And all of our newer systems, we use a lot of bitters these days because there was probably the most fundamental move forward was understanding how intimately toxin transporters and bile transporters work together. Like to move bile out of the liver, so you're moving it from the hepatocyte, the liver cell, into the across the canalicular membrane into the bile canaliculus. That's the start of the bile tree, and then it goes down into the gallbladder. So there's two transporters that do it. One's called the bile salt export pump. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. And the other one is MRP2, the multi-drug resistance protein. It's the same thing. That's the one that moves mercury glutathione conjugates, all the toxin, glucuronic acid, glutathione, sulfate conjugates. All those move through there, and they're co-located together, and they get internalized when they're under stress. And what's the thing that's most likely to do this? Endotoxin. If we sat here for 4 hours and talked about all the ramifications of toxins and detox,
Right.
endotoxin would keep coming up again and again and again and again as the driver of the negative aspects of detox. But these transporters are actually pulled out of the canalicular membrane when the hepatocyte is under a lot of stress. And what do you do then? You pump the toxins back into the blood. MRP3 dumps them back into the blood because the hepatocyte can kill it. It can die from having too much toxin in it. So when things get out of hand, you dump stuff back into the blood. And so you want to, one, protect the transporters into that membrane. That's one of the things that milk thistle does, is anchor them into that membrane. And glutathione is going to do that too by bringing down a lot of the oxidative stress in there. And then you want to amplify that transport out, and that's what the bitter compounds do. It turns up bile salt export. And so in our Black Box 2 and our upcoming Push Catch, it's a two-part detox. Two parts. One is called liver sauce. It's a great name, isn't it? So liver sauce has all these bitters. It has nano milk thistle, nano lipoic acid, and a couple of histamine blockers all together. You take that. 30 minutes later, you take the ultra binder and mop it all up.
Wow.
And that came from just I'll send you a copy there in Townsend Letter last in January. Carrie Decker and I wrote a long article, even for Townsend. This was long, and we detailed every pathway in liver and how they work, how they backfire, how you keep them flowing. And that, that was the basis for developing and designing this detox system. So detox has really come a long way from the old, this herb detoxes you, or bear garlic, or cilantro, and nobody knows why, and there's no pathways. And so when I started developing detox, I wouldn't use cilantro because nobody knows even what's in it and why it does it. It's not that it doesn't do anything, but nobody knows what it is. So if I'm going to design detoxes around biochemical pathways, I got to at least have some literature on what they are. And even when I go back, and even when you go back to old things, there's so much research now on gentian and myrrh and solidago, these herbs that are sort of old-timey, but we know why they work and how they work, and we can design good systems.
That's awesome. The thing that I really appreciate is the attention to detail that you guys have, how you're willing to go step by step because it's the right thing to do. And so when I started using your products with my patients, the question from the patient is always, well, why do I use this one? Right. Yeah. And the reason is that because I know that Shade already did all this work. I know that he's not just putting something in a bottle and being like, here, I'll do it. This liquid cilantro, you'll probably feel better, right? But
Maybe.
the point is, yeah, the point is, though, is that I appreciate the technical work that you guys are doing, because it allows the functional medicine provider to stand on a platform for their patients and say, hey, this is what we're doing, and I trust it. So that's a big deal. And
go to YouTube and watch a bunch of videos, and you won't understand most of it, but you'll trust it.
So that's cool. I appreciate it, though. So, what's next for Dr. Shade and Quicksilver? What's the next big thing?
So we have these newer detox systems coming out, and they're more broad spectrum. It's not just mercury now.
Okay.
It's all the environmental toxins, and so we're setting up to do a bunch of the GPL tox profiles. Great Plains has those. Like 18 different environmental toxin metabolites and Roundup. And because the doctors have been saying, man, everything just goes away when you do like black box 2. And so we're going to do some of that before and after, and just really get that all nailed down. And then we're going to work out the immune side. And so I'm actually writing a book this year looking at toxins, allergy, and immunity, because and the fundamental step to recovering your health being detoxification, because of the way, how the toxins will go out. Most of them will set up that Th1, Th2 shift where you become highly allergic and totally non-vigilant on your microbes. And sometimes sometimes just detoxing will fix that. Other times you got to go in and you got to kill something to pull it out. So having some really nice antimicrobials. I told you I did the nano cat's claw, reversed Epstein-Barr and cytomegalovirus in like 6 doses. I mean, that was, and that
6
was
doses.
See, it was no time at all. It was days, I mean, I tend to overdose, and so there must have been big doses, but it was just like, it just flipped it. And I got all the data to show it. It was like, God. And so that one's real excited. I'm doing lomatium for fungal. I'm working through a couple of Chinese ones for parasites, berberine, and propolis. So we'll have a couple of different real strong antimicrobials, because the microbes get in and they take control. Like once Epstein-Barr gets in and cytomegalovirus get in, it's hard to just detox them away. Now, they're very opportunistic in low glutathione environments. So the glutathione really helps you get there, but sometimes you just got to nail those, just move them out of the way a little bit. And so having those, we have a great allergy formula now. We got quercetin, luteolin, and ascorbyl palmitate into a nanoparticle. And the key is that in these nanoforms, the amounts you need are just like so low. Like quercetin, to make it do anything, it's weeks at 3 grams a day. This is like 20 milligrams, and it just like puts the kibosh on it immediately. The cat's claw, like I got a 60 milliliter tincture of cat's claw and turned it into 200 doses. And maybe I did 10 to turn this around. So it was a 20th of a tincture vial. Usually, it's like 20 tincture vials and it starts to ship things. So certain things, it's ironic that everybody gets into liposomes with liposomal vitamin C, which is like the most non-consequential use of a liposome, whereas you get to these things like quercetin and these antimicrobials, and it just takes it up to a level that's just outrageous. And so filling in this whole system where you're leading with detox, you've got antimicrobials when you need them, and you've got allergy control when you need it, and then you've got the way to bring the individual all the way back to that balanced life.
I like it. I'm in. I'm gonna, like, as soon as you got that stuff ready to go, I'm in. Let's do it.
No, I'll send you some beta test stuff you can play
do
with.
it. That'd be phenomenal.
Because it's so fun. And as soon as I send it to you, somebody's gonna come in and say, I've got Epstein-Barr.
always how it works. So
Yeah,
it's like the gift from the universe. You don't get problems you
it
can't solve.
is. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
there you go. So what I want to do is wrap up here, Doctor, with a couple of things. Number one, it's like tradition on the Nutrition Hero podcast that you talk about a case, a clinical case, where you felt, maybe for better or worse, that you stepped in and you're able to go, hey, I just dropped some knowledge on this patient and it changed their life. Do you have a specific case in your world, whether it be a detox case or otherwise, where you feel like, what in the world, that was worth going through all of the pain of being a doctor just for that person?
Just for that case, geez,
Yeah.
there's a lot of them. Uh, who do we want to? I started working in the autism world recently, and there's two notably. I just did one with Amy Dirksen that was really strong, but we're in the middle of it. The first one, though, was the most radical. This kid was 9 years old. He uh, he was verbal, but he couldn't read and write. Like he could kind of read, but he couldn't write. He couldn't write his name. He had no knowledge of time. Like what? Hey, can we do this next week? Oh, last year you gave this to me. Even yesterday you gave. We did this. Lost all that, and all we did was put him on the nano hemp oil and the adaptogen blend. Well, we ended up taking him over to the mitochondrial blend, the one. And I said, well, let's calm down the neuroinflammation and build up the mitochondria and harmonize the hormones. And it was ridiculous. It was like 3 weeks. The kid was remembering backward in time, like he ran into the garage. He came back to his mom. He said, hey, last Easter you gave me this kite and we never used it. Can we go put it together and fly it? And she fell over, and of course she's crying. She's like, that was amazing. The next day he goes, I've had that bike for 4 years. Why don't I learn to ride it? He learned to ride it in 30 minutes. Like the neighbors were all out on the porches crying.
Oh,
and,
man.
And, and then he's like, and then the next thing he wants to do is, he starts writing. They start changing all of the class structures, and then he wants to hang out with all the normal kids, and he did. And then soon he's like, he's spilling the beans, on his mom, on all the things she says to, about her friends, like, why are you talking to Molly? You said she was a jerk,
Right.
And it was like, all the good and the bad out. And it was just like a matter of months, the whole thing unfolded. And it was 2 products.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. So, Doctor, I really appreciate your time and your attention being on the podcast today. So,
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure with you, Dr.
you're
Watt.